Okay, cool. And we're live. Over to you, buddy.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Cool Story Bro. Uh, I'm your host today. No, I'm joking. Today, I'm Oliver. We're going to talk about Kung Fu. So I do a lot of Kung Fu. I like Kung Fu. And so I thought we could talk about it. Basically, I'll give I'll give a quick introduction to some thoughts about Kung Fu. And then I kind of want to sort of talk about a lot of the esoteric stuff that we have within Kung Fu and kind of a way to approach that. And then maybe use that as a springboard for going into sort of other related things. So first of all, a lot of people don't actually know what Kung Fu is. They just assume it's a style of martial art, but actually it's just anything from China to do with fisticuffs, with fighting. So it comes, people say it comes from yoga. It has a lot of different lineages and things like this, and there are literally thousands of types. The thing about Kung Fu is that it has an oral history, so it makes it very difficult actually to really pin down what happens. But a lot of it is related to a lot of the kind of the more fantastical stories and abilities that you hear about are related to some of the things that people talk about with yoga, like kind of developing things to a high level. And it's kind of very difficult to figure out what's real and what isn't real. But what's clear to me is that there is a lot of cultural and also technical sort of wealth to the topic of Kung Fu. And I think that a huge amount of it has been lost in the last 100 or so years within China, but there's still a lot around. So Kung Fu is distinct from sport fighting. Sport fighting is, it's a ritualized form of combat and all that. And without getting too much into the whole, I certainly don't believe the thing that many people say, which is that, oh, the Kung Fu is too deadly to be used or something. If someone says that, they probably don't know how to use it. But, there are still things that people don't know that can be used in the world of martial arts and stuff. So all that said, the thing that's for me very interesting about martial arts at the moment is the internal martial arts stuff. So I started off with Wing Chun, which is a form of Kung Fu from China, and that derives from the Shaolin Temple. And recently, because I had an injury, I've been getting more into internal things like Qigong, Tai Chi, Bagua, Baji, and these all have Qigong within them. So the idea of some of those martial arts is that you develop yourself to a high level, and then you're able to then use those those attributes that have been developed to a high level for fighting abilities. And then as time goes on, it gets developed into a system. In ancient China, everything was much more connected. So Chinese medicine, philosophy, martial arts, many other more interesting esoteric practices that have been lost or sort of minimized. These would be all things that you would learn at the same time. Hence, you have people doing sort of pressure point, one touch kill nonsense. But at the same time, there are acupressure applications within martial arts. It's just when you combine that with the whole culture of martial arts being used for protection of the whole society back in the day, it does make sense that people disconnect the reality and from what they would say. So you do have a lot of this kind of nebulous stuff going on within the world of Kung Fu. So you always have to be realistic about what people can actually do. But having spent a lot of time doing martial arts and traveling around and seeing people, I can say there are some abilities that you can develop, or some attributes you can develop that are, pretty cool, pretty impressive. And like I said, within the internal arts, it originally developed within this context of going out and developing yourself along the lines of these practices that had been developed in ancient China that did coexist with internal arts, and those attributes develop to a point where you could apply them. So, for example, Bagua, no one really knows where that one comes from. It's generally accepted to be older than Tai Chi, which is very old. And people would do this thing where they would do these exercises, these sort of circle walking exercises, and it would develop their internal energy. And then over time, they noticed that these people were stronger long into old age, and they were more vital, and they started to develop this into a fighting system. Tai Chi, there's a saying that says, Tai Chi is Qigong, but Qigong is not Tai Chi. And that means that Qigong, which is a system of combining physical movement and will and intention with some of these Chinese medicine principles, is inherent within Tai Chi, and it utilizes that with sort of body mechanics and fighting to create the system. Whereas Qigong is the isolated Qigong element within that. So these are just, what I'm trying to give is really just a picture of just a background for a discussion in Kung Fu. What I really want to talk about is the whole thing of how do you approach not only people's fantastical claims and stuff like that, it's not really that interesting, but internal energy and the thing about Qi. So Qi is basically just this idea of, it's a concept of internal energy. People will call it the life force. It's something that exists within all things, you know. You can call it an agent of change. And when you're talking about Qigong or Chinese medicine, you're talking about moving the Qi through the body. So essentially moving, flowing Qi is positive, and stagnant Qi is bad. And a lot of the higher level things you do within internal martial arts are related to Qi. But whenever you get to a point where you're training with someone who's really good, it's pretty common for them to tell you to just ignore everything everyone tells you about Qi, because it's very easy to get mystical with that stuff. And in my opinion, it's not mystical. In my opinion, it's actually, it's a placeholder for things that are difficult to explain. And although there are some things that I think are going on that are maybe a little bit difficult to explain, perhaps within, maybe Qi is like an electromagnetic field that people have. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter. I think it's about being able to go out there and sort of apply these techniques and develop your energy or whatever. But as soon as you get too far into believing one thing or another, and that's when you start to lose a connection to it and an ability to use it. So that's really kind of my opinion about Qi. I think there is something that you can do. I think there are attributes that you can develop within martial arts or within yoga. And I think there's a lot of stuff that people don't understand. But I think that if you go out there and you try to decide that something is one way or another, and you try to put a label onto something, then you're immediately restricted by that, and it really inhibits your ability to apply. And when you get people who could do it, as soon as someone says something that's a bit too woo-woo, because I know, like, in this group we talk a lot about ideas of energy and stuff, but a lot of these things are kind of beyond the realm of what we can prove or understand, right? It doesn't mean there aren't some things going on. So how do you really engage with that? And so I'd be interested in your thoughts, because I know, Lynn, obviously you do martial arts, Michael, you do yoga, and Nick, you do shamanistic-y things, if I understand correctly. And sort of all these things are about things that are a little bit difficult to define, and still your subjective experience suggests that there's definitely something going on. And so how do you engage with it without sort of submitting to tosh, submitting to nonsense? and being able to actually have a working relationship is just something you understand. And like I said, for me, chi is just it's an electromagnetic field. It's linked. There's something going on there between breath and intention and body, and of course, it's useful to build knowledge and to try to actually have a framework to be able to apply. But whenever you get people who are going too far into chi, they very quickly turn into they're just going off on one, and there's no connection to reality. And so for me, martial arts it's a way to combine inner and outer worlds and stuff like this. So anyway, that's my little pre-ramble perhaps. So anyone who's interested in jumping in and riffing off that, be my guest.
Cool. Yeah, I've got a few things to say. So I think I don't really understand chi, I guess, any better than you guys. Like I guess the way I see it is kind of like cultivating energy within the body, right? So you're trying to harness whatever energy's out there in the universe, and there's obviously we're connected to all that because we're a part of nature, we're a part of the universe. And I think, like you said, so much of it has been lost that we don't really even understand our bodies anymore, like what they're capable of, what we can do. You see some of the stuff these Shaolin monks do, and it just seems like magic. Or it's like, it just seems like we can't imagine our bodies being cultivated to that level of sort of refinement. So I kind of look at it as that process of refinement, and the alchemists talk about that as well. It's like you're constantly refining the senses, refining the body. As you're able to take in more energy, obviously you've taken that energy into yourself, and if you know how to channel it, it can be really supportive of life in general, right? So the idea that you can live longer, be healthier, all these ideas of longevity and anti-aging, that's kind of more where I approach it from. And so I'm always trying to understand it in that context of like, how does the body work? All these things we call metabolism and the sort of scientific definitions today, they're very sort of narrow, but you can kind of see where chi fits into some of these things. When you talk about the electromagnetic field that we have, how the body uses electrons to power all these processes and pathways. And if you don't, those things aren't working, you can get sick and disease very quickly. I think that's what we're seeing in actually a lot of society, is that we've actually come so far away from our what I call like our biological adaptations. So even without cultivating chi or energy, right, by default that stuff is all there all the time. It's all in us. I think that we're just trying to sort of get back to something that we naturally had, because as a society and culturally we've moved so far away that we now need to have a practice to get back to it. And so I think there's always that process of like, depending on what time in history you're born, and obviously which family you grew up in, and which part of the world you grew up in, you're more or less removed from that, and so you have to find a way to get back to it. And I think obviously these like oral traditions of Tai Chi, they go back a long time. So there's a lot of wisdom there, just based on experimentation of like refining and what works. And obviously, it's a shame that maybe a lot of it wasn't written down, and maybe it's not really even understood or respected today. So I think the mainstream, there's no Tai Chi classes in school. You go play football or sport or something like very physical, and you're not actually learning about how to regenerate the body. So my interest is more in that regenerative process of like, how do you build the body up? And then when you get into martial arts as well, there's some quite destructive elements of it, right? You're potentially fighting an enemy. There's a combative element there. So I guess that's a useful skill to have to defend yourself. But my interest is more in like, if you're going to practice these things, how do you make sure it's regenerative and not like actually taking you down, like in terms of your energy? Like you can over exercise, right? This idea of like chronic cardio, and people are really into exercise all the time now, but actually it's stupid the way people are doing it, because they're exercising indoors with very poor light, poor air. It's like really dead conditions, right? There's no chi, and then they're basically exhausting their bodies, and they think that's healthy, and they do that for 20-30 years to try and keep the weight off because they're not eating well. So I think just kind of bringing it back to practical, or just like integrating that from that perspective, like what would you say is, from your experience, because you said you also had an injury, I'm curious, like what's been your experience kind of developing that refinement process to like testing your body, obviously trying to prove the limit, but having a maybe how can I say, like a routine or a process that lets you know not to overstep that. And then I think you can also maybe take in too much chi sometimes, maybe not be able to channel it, and that can cause also imbalances. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what caused that injury maybe, and what's been your journey in like moving from more of the maybe combative side, which is maybe more depletive, and to more of the like the stuff you're doing now, which is maybe more repletive in terms of like the body and the energy. How have you sensed that change in yourself?
Sure. Well, I mean, I agree with most of what you said there. And I think that, well, first of all, the key for me always was not really that much about fighting. It was more about being able to sort of develop myself in any kind of way. And so the martial arts for me was kind of like, well, it's kind of like an ancient thing, and it's about aligning my body and my mind and my outside world together. And so being able to kind of adjust the frequency between those various points definitely gave me a much better sort of intuition about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And the idea was to just sort of use that as a tool to put myself into tune with things. I know that sounds a bit high-minded or whatever, but it was like that for me at the time. And the fighting thing, I always avoided MMA and stuff like that because I didn't particularly like the vibe of it. And then when I got into it, it took me out of that state of mind a little bit, actually. So basically, I would do the martial arts stuff and treat it as a meditation. And I would always train outside. I would always treat the training with somebody else as kind of a corrector, a kind of a means of having, you know, another body trying to stop you from doing what you're doing is an immediate feedback loop. And so for me, the idea of like, oh, here's a position, you know, and that these traditions that are kind of, like you say, verbally passed down, you can't really connect them verbally. Some of it doesn't really work that way. But holding these sort of positions and these things, you become like an antenna. It's kind of, you know, people hold these positions for a long time and then you change the position, it feels different. So that's something that's been passed down. And so if you don't have a feedback loop, some kind of connection to reality, whether it's martial arts or not, you're just going to get too much in your own head. So to be more specific, I would always train outside. I would use that kind of state of mind to kind of really figure out what I wanted to do with nutrition. And it was pretty paired with nutrition from the beginning, because I was training a lot and I had a very fast feedback based on what I would eat. I would train 8 or 9 hours a day for a really long time. And then
Which is pretty crazy, right? For most people, they couldn't handle that amount of training.
No, but then you know, I built up to that because I would fast, right? And I would eat something and I would pay attention to how it made me feel, or I would record it and I would go and research based on that. And then that would give me a pretty directed perspective. And so then I built up a pretty good sort of system pretty early. And I just sort of figured out what worked for me. And, you know, but yeah, in terms of you know, I think what I'm trying to really communicate now is you're asking me what did I do that kind of fit in. I can tell you, well, I ate well and I trained outside and I trained hard and stuff. But the point is that I think, or even in terms of chi, or what people call chi, it is about your attitude. It's about your mental, your intention, how you're kind of tuned in and how that interacts with the actions that you have. You know, I train with like a Tai Chi group and they'll say, do a certain movement. And they'll say, oh, do you feel that? Do you feel like that? Do you feel like that? And then once you kind of tuned into what they're trying to say, you're literally trying to change how you hold your mind in a certain way. And as that's interacting with your body, that kind of, you feel different things moving within yourself. And on a more basic level, you know, just living in accordance with the laws of nature, you know, and just living all that sort of stuff that people talk about when it comes to alchemy, being, you know, a better person, or just not stepping away from nature and having like a pure intention in your mind, and essentially, or importantly, you know, having congruence between what you want and what you do, and having things that are not implanted in your mind from outside. All that stuff, literally, just from the perspective of Chinese medicine, it increases your internal energy, you know, because you're everything's in harmony, everything's balanced. It's just about balance, and there are many different ways to apply that. And
So it's like directing energy without depleting yourself. I guess that's what we've lost as well. And you look at the way yoga's used today. A lot of people doing it indoors, and I did that for years indoors before I figured out this is stupid. Why am I doing yoga indoors? And I just got rid of the mat and just started doing it on the grass, and I felt like 10 times better. And obviously Tai Chi is all done on the grass, right? So this is just an obvious part of the tradition. You wouldn't find people doing Tai Chi inside. That'd be stupid. But the way we exercise and move today, I think, is very depletive. So I'm just curious, like, have you ever found a point where, like, with this injury you mentioned, was that caused by just overexertion or a different type of like martial art that you were doing or experimenting with? How have you found that limit within yourself to make sure it's regenerative for you and not like depletive? And then I'll hand it over to Lynn.
Sure. Well, actually, I never ever injured myself ever the entire time I was training, because I was always in line with that state of mind. I feel I was always in a good state of mind. Everything was in a playful way, and it's very difficult to injure yourself like that. And then, I decided to really go for it in MMA, and I thought I'm going to start fighting, and doing combat sport. And I'd avoided that up until then because it wasn't what I had wanted to do. And I just thought, well, now's the time if I'm going to do it. So what I did is I started working as a lumberjack. I was working outside in Germany. It was sustainable lumberjackery, all right, but it was working as a lumberjack, throwing logs around and stuff, and it was extremely, extremely good for fitness. And in fact, I would train MMA twice a day, and it needed less recovery. And also, I believe when you cut open a tree, if it's a fresh tree, something comes out, it gives you a little vitality. And I just had that feeling outside for 12 hours a day or whatever. And essentially, I wasn't wearing steel toe cap boots, and a big tree just rolled onto my feet, onto my big toes. And I didn't really get it checked out. It wasn't that bad, but then 2 months passed, 2 more months passed, 2 more months passed. It just didn't heal. And then I was kind of, I was weeks away from beginning a career fighting, like properly fighting pro, And I was just a bundle of testosterone and adrenaline. I had nowhere to direct it. So I just sort of sat there. And then I kind of realized, okay, this isn't going to heal unless I kind of stop moving. So I just confined myself to bed for about 10 months, wasted away. And I didn't really know what to do at that point because it still wasn't healing. Don't know why it wasn't healing, but essentially it was an alignment issue. So the tendons in the toes are wrong. Then I went and did some Qigong, and it got 50% better in about a day. And I was like, oh. Then it's now been 3 years, and I'm basically healed. Although I still have some back issues from walking in a weird way for so long, but it's essentially healed now, and I'm kind of just cleaning up the last little bits of the injury, doing a Qigong. And what it was all that heavy exercise, and then suddenly stopping. It made it kind of freeze up a bit. But yeah, I believe I wouldn't have been so stupid or to not wear the boots, or I had never gotten injured before when I was in a kind of a less aggressive state of mind. And so it was a pretty immediate correction in my mind. And I know I don't want to get too, essentially it's just because I wasn't wearing the boots, but I don't want to get too woo-woo about it. But for me, it was like, all right, I'm going to try it, do the martial arts I always do. I'm going to do it this way, a more aggressive way, and try and hurt people with it for money, and immediately bang. I was like, right, okay. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to stop fighting. I'm just going to start focusing on back closer to what I used to do. And it just started healing again. So I don't know, go figure.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Nice. Yeah, I'd love to jump in at this point, if that's all right. Bit of background, you'll know, but I love talking about myself. Born and raised in the martial arts world from about the day I was born, because it's my parents' business. They ran martial arts schools in London. My dad had studied under someone fresh off the boat career, and so it's all those sort of things. Now, the interesting thing I did find, and like what Ollie was saying, I think what we can all probably appreciate, we've all seen, is that there is something, like there's a part of you that really wants to believe all these esoteric things about, say, Qi, because it's such beautiful, it's magical, gets your imagination going, especially the older you get, because very few things have that effect on you. And I guess the negative of it is that it kind of takes away let me say negative. what I think that actually is, these beautiful things, it's actually, it could be seen as a reminder of how beautiful and amazing the body is itself, and what we are able to do, our bodies and minds. And like Ollie was saying, the use of labels kind of cuts it off and set, you know, and so that you're building those neural pathways to say that is not a part of me naturally. I have to do something to get it. It's not already there in me. So I completely agree with that. And how I think there's evidence I can see to the contrary is that, I mean, I could probably attest to this. Most things you hear about chi are all anecdotal. From experiences, whether it's say people you trust, even like my father, who never went on about things in that way, like his mysticism, but he said he had experiences when he was training at the height of his training, where, for example, they were doing a demonstration, and they had a thing where you had some guys standing, about 4 or 5 guys standing, and someone holding a breeze block, like a building at the end. So you had to run and jump over them and kick it. So this is something we were pretty used to doing. It sounds, I guess, again, it's one of those things that seems superhuman, but it's from repetition training, you know, learning that your boundaries, you know, pushing the boundaries more and more, these things become normal. But what he was saying is he had to wear trainers, unfortunately. Usually he trained barefoot, but he had to wear trainers, and strangely enough, it meant he had less grip on the grass he was running on. So he was running, and it must have been a bit mildewy. And as he was jumping to clear them, he felt himself, basically didn't feel right, it slipped. But then he said somehow he managed to continue going up, up, up. And there was photos of it. It was stupidly high. And my dad was only about 5'5", but he was clearing these people. I mean, he knew he could do it anyway. But anyway, but he said it didn't make sense because of the many, many years he'd done this thing. But he said this felt very, very wrong. Yet he still managed to clear it and hit it. And he said, so he said that could be something to do with chi, could be something to do with that. He said, or it's just the fact that my body is so well honed and trained that it made adjustments where necessary, even though he didn't feel right, because his body knew what the intention was. It was to clear these people and hit this thing on the other end. And so that's why I think, I mean, it'd be lovely if chi was like everything in Dragon Ball Z, where you can just do all these things that was like just shooting beams out of your hands, you know, and all these crazy things. I'm not saying it's not possible at all. I'm not saying that at all, because again, you know, I'm sure we've all seen things, maybe experienced things, but it's, I think, like here, it's kind of reinforcing the point Ollie made earlier, giving a label to something and then disassociating that label from the human body or mind, it's counterproductive massively. Because I've not studied Qigong at all. I've looked into it. I've played about with certain Chinese arts, like one called Loga, has what touch of Qigong. But I often find that everything kind of, and I mainly do Korean styles, but they all birthed from Chinese styles, Japanese styles, you know, and then from India as well. And when they start talking about things like methods of calming your mind and chi, it's from what I've read, not that I've done them, from what I've read and the stories I've spoken to people who have done other styles, it's all seems very similar. Like a lot of ways, many religions are very similar to one another. They've all got similar themes. It's kind of the case with martial arts as well. And the idea of cultivating chi, and it's long and short of it. Like you said, we've already got it in us. It's just chi, I think, is a way of, it's explaining unexplainable. Things like you were saying, and we just don't know what we can do. And so when we see something that we can imagine, we don't have the neural pathways that says that makes sense, that something to do with the human body, we'll call it that's something supernatural. Now these monks, you know, cutting blades on their bodies, you know, cutting a watermelon, you know, it's technique and practice, you know, it's intention as well. I stop the blade right in the right place in the right time and stuff like that, or laying on a bed of nails. I mean, I equate that to having the cold shower personally. Like it's just, like once you're doing it enough, it feels right. Or doing things like push-ups, like just on your thumbs. You know, we used to do it as like when we did demonstrations, like we used to do push-ups just using our thumbs. You know, and people are like, "Oh my god!" It's like it's just you get there gradually from your fingertips, 4 fingers, 3, 2, 1. And yet it's people will try and put mysticism to it because they want to associate themselves with these high highs. When I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. That's just something that we have naturally, just been able to unlock it and doing the right sets of movements or exercises or thinking processes to get to unlock those parts of us. And even saying it like that sounds a bit esoteric, unlocking parts. But as kind of, yeah, I thought I'd just chuck that out there. It's just, it's something that is always intriguing to see, because even times I find myself falling into that trap going, oh wow, like, and I'm like, hang on a minute, what have they done for the past 5, 10, 15 years before this point? You know, what they've done, I'm just seeing the end products, you know, like the Instagram photo, what's actually happened to get to that point. And it's probably far more boring than it probably really is.
I'm curious then, though, did you train mostly indoors or outdoors growing up in London? Because I think I saw couple of your photos like indoors in gyms and stuff. And did you ever then try it outside for a long enough period of time to compare the two?
Sure. So it was primarily indoors because, again, it was mainly an indoors thing. However, usually twice a year we'd have these training camps where you go to somewhere, Clacton or somewhere with a beach mainly. You'd be getting up about 2, 3 in the morning. You have 3 sessions a day. You get up first one's about 2 or 3 in the morning. You get up and you road run to the beach, and then it's a beach work for about 2, 3 hours. And that, you know, and it's purely about the fact that for the physical side of things, it's everything's a million times harder on sand than on a moving surface and on a concrete surface. Also involved, you know, you're always falling over into the sand, which means you're making contact with it a lot. And so you're outdoors as well. You know, sea air, wonderful thing. So you'd often find when you'd come back from these camps, you'd mainly just attribute it to the fact you've done far more physically strained exercise because it's been sand and it's far more frequent per day than it was. Because usually a 2-3 day thing wasn't too long, you know, twice a year. But you were ridiculously, when you got back to class the following week, you didn't really need recovery time really when you think about it. And everything just felt so much easier. Like your fighting was a lot easier because you were sparring on the sand as well. Push-ups were a lot easier, sit-ups a lot easier. You know, because a lot of kicking techniques and style. It's a lot of jumping, binaural kicking. It's a lot of that core work. Everything was a lot easier, so quickly. Where even like every now and again, I've done myself when I'm on a holiday somewhere, as a beach, I'll just do some. Try and look subtle because I don't like having attention, but these exercises, or even just like being in the sea, all you can see is my head, but my hands and feet are busy doing lots of movements, trying to just against that resistance. Because it's a beautiful thing. So yes, to answer your question, you do notice a difference very much from when you are outside to inside, and you then craved and missed it. And this is like the sentiment from everyone. I mean, there's good camaraderie as well, so that helps. But everyone that you never met someone, even of different abilities, who didn't find a massive benefit from being outside, training in nature, on the sands, or even if they couldn't attend those classes because they was maybe too junior grade, they were still training on the grass. You know, it was all outdoor training. Very rarely went indoors. Or if it was really bad weather, we'd just all be in our individual caravans with walkie-talkies, with instructors shouting instructions. Yeah, but it was just really, yes, I guess is the answer to that. Really did massive benefit.
It's interesting what you said about the beach as well, because a lot of people don't, I think, recognize this. But if you look at the Brazilian footballers, they all train barefoot on the sand for like, years growing up. And the amount of chi I think that they're harnessing in their bodies and energy, like they just dominate sports. They're by far the best football team. No one can touch them, and they make it look easy because their bodies are just like obviously a lot stronger. And I think that's just from years of that kind of environment. And the chi by the beach, like the energy there is just amazing. If you look at like the negative ions from the water coming in and the air, like if you live by the beach, you'll feel amazing, right? Beachfront property is the most expensive in the world for a reason,
Yeah.
right? Humans desire to live there. Every time you have a week's holiday, everyone goes to the beach. So I think there's something very innate in that, very powerful. If you look at that, there's just signs of it everywhere that certain conditions are just optimal for life. And I think that's where I kind of approach it from, and studying that and seeing, oh yeah, all these things kind of make sense. I go to the beach and lie in the sand and I sun gaze, and sun gazing is a really powerful, again, way to sort of harness energy in the body. And it just feels 10 times better just lying on the beach, just immersed in the sand. And you have crystals in the sand, right? Which is like a very organized, coherent type of light that can capture light. And the sun's just beaming down that sand, just years and years and years. And you're in that sort of bed of sand that sort of surrounded by crystals, if you like. And that coherence is just so powerful, combined with the air, combined with the sun. My sun gazing sessions there, I just don't want to go. I'm just there for like 3, 4, 5 hours, and I just feel like I'm getting younger and younger just by lying there. So that's been my experience. I think, yeah, that is really powerful, being by the beach, especially. And then obviously, I've done some breathing exercises and stuff indoors, and obviously there's chi everywhere in that sense. You can do, really powerful breath work, and you feel amazing after 5 minutes, even indoors. But I think just like the default state that we're in, where we're not actively trying to sort of harness or cultivate this thing. It's just like we're just breathing normally, right? So just say you're sitting down on the computer, you're working, and whatever your day-to-day average life is. If you're indoors, there's just less of that available to you. And if you're outdoors, you don't have to try so hard to get it. It's just there. And I think that's been kind of my experience, is trying, how do I reorganize my life so my default state is in that, it's in that environment, and it's just constantly building up, building up. And then, yeah, I could go for Tai Chi classes on top or do some yoga on top and all those kind of things. But it's not, I'm not using the way other people I think are trying to use it, which is to maintain their health that they're otherwise just losing by being in a somewhat suboptimal environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think it's something to think about, because everyone's moving into cities, and it's funny, both you guys also live in cities, and obviously you're able to cultivate your chi and your energy, I think reduces sort of damage somewhat. But for people who don't have that awareness and know how to cultivate these things, I mean, yeah, you can learn about it and I hope you run into some good Tai Chi teacher somewhere, or you can just look at the sort of principles and go off your own feedback, like how you feel lying on the beach, for example,
So true.
and get a good idea for what the body actually needs to feed itself. And now I feel like, yeah, I actually want to get into Tai Chi now and some of these things now, because I feel there's a lot to add into my practice. But I'm feeling so good just from lying in the sun on the beach. I'm not even doing anything. I'm just lazy. I'm just being a beach bum. So I think there's lots of ways to approach this, which is interesting.
Well done resisting the urge, putting a towel down and laying on the towel. Well done for that. But also, Ollie, got a question for you, mate. So, since, obviously you can go off to where you want to go with this. I've spoke with some people who have in the past, so they've done internal styles. And again, I just don't want to talk to them, because it's like talking to someone that's been on a gap year trip. They go all different with it, and it's like it's something super special and different, which is fine. It may well be, but if they really want to tell me the good bits, they're not maybe putting it the right way, being all airy-fairy about it. So I want to ask you, because you seem pretty, obviously, I trust you, I've met you, I know you, and from what your experience and your journey and how far you feel you are with it, do you think this might seem, it's not a UFO question, but do you think like some of these supernatural things that are thought of that are associated with chi, i.e. being bulletproof? I mean, I know some of those people are just fakes. That's not because they're like being able to do these things that seem so extreme, i.e. making your body obtain certain abilities that at first glance don't seem natural to the human body, because require a rearrangement of atoms and molecules, and also things such as like levitation. So that's something that tends to be mentioned in part also. And what's your viewpoint on that? Yeah, basically on all those things and that sort of POV.
Sure. I think I keep my mind open to anything. I guess. I mean, different things are possible. I think in terms of what I've seen people who just I've never seen anything truly outrageous, and I've heard a lot of anecdotal things as well. I've seen people who are old men who are able to move their bodies in totally different ways, and I've seen someone take a chopstick and take the plastic chopstick and put it between two pieces of tissue paper. And one person holds the tissue paper on each side, right? Just on the corners. And then so it's just suspended by the two pieces, and they take their two fingers and go like that. And it breaks into 7 pieces and it doesn't rip the paper. I've seen that happen. I've seen people bend their spears on their throat and stuff.
Oh,
what I think it is, I mean, I think there's like, maybe a little bit of chi involved in that and stuff, but I think what that is there's chi involved and stuff, but it's technique. Yeah. I think people can develop things to a really high level, and so I do think there is something going on. I think people really go way too far with it, and I think that it's just another thing within the body. But I also think you can't discount it. I think back in the day, people had a really good ability to cultivate themselves in basically the same way Michael's talking about. I think you don't even necessarily need like an existing sort of legacy system if you can tune into things. It's just that back then everybody was doing it. Everybody was involved in this world, and just a lot of stuff has been lost. So sorry, I can't give a more satisfying answer, I suppose, but I do think there are things that are possible, definitely.
No, it's
but
funny because I've seen similar things as
doesn't need
well.
you.
Like, yeah, no, I've seen a guy throw a chopstick into a 2-inch piece of wood and it's stuck. It's just a wooden chopstick.
Right.
You know, like yeah. And he said that he channeled his chi through it into it. You know, see people make. I've not seen this in person, but you know, by sort of trustworthy sources who I've been spoke to after, you know, that they can make a bell ring from across the room, for example, you know, stuff like that. Or, I mean, I remember stuff that we had to do, you know, like one of our to get our belts, we had to punch out a candle without touching it. You know, stuff like that. Obviously, that's more like that was purely about technique. That wasn't about cheat. That was a technique. But someone looking would think, "Oh my God, what just happened there? That's like magic." But it's not. It's about technique and everything, right? Sinking up from the toes all the way to your hat to the end of the hand, and where you're stopping it. And you know, but yeah, I mean, actually, like what you said about the elderly, that's probably the greatest testament of anything. But it's the ability, and it still sinks in. I think with all the conversations we always have, as everyone does, or you know, Mike especially is putting posts on about is that longevity and like quality, and the condition of the human body, and it kind of makes these stories about even the biblical stories. You know, where I mean, I'm one of those people. I've actually read the Bible just because I hated people saying, "Oh, you haven't read it, you don't know." So I read it, and you see some of these things about these people that have lived like let's say hundreds of years. That could be simply mistake because of not maybe having good records of timelines, but it could also be because their life was probably 95% outdoors, just something as simple as that, you know, and you know, foods are exposed to, and it is really simple when you think about it. It's hard now because we've created this environment for ourselves, but yeah, like I like that we saying about the elderly, especially yeah.
I like what Ollie was saying earlier about intention, and I also think that a part of it's the integration as well. So as you learn more in the martial arts journey and then you integrate it, some of the things that might seem extreme or esoteric to others then just becomes like the normal space. And so in regards to like intention, you know, what I've seen just from the bits and pieces that I've done just quickly. So I was training with a Muay Thai world champion 4 hours a day, a couple of times a day for a fight that I ended up having spent a month in China doing Baji, and I've done a bit of Qigong and Neigong, and now I do more natural movement, sort of Ido Portal style, like natural parkour kind of stuff, which is a mix of all of that, which is like my own, you know, cycle of integration and learning new things and all of that. But just to get back to it, like, you know, the intention of what we take into these practices is really what's key. In my opinion, it might be slightly different. I think that it's totally not esoteric, but also totally esoteric. So it's like the paradox of it all. So I think sort of people go into it where they might have some kind of intention of building up their chi or the microcosmic orbit, or there's a lot of men that get into it because they want to, you know, show how powerful they are, or they want to be a master, or it gets very hierarchical. I've found as well, especially it seems to be like a link that I've seen between like men and martial arts and the pickup women scene as well. It kind of tends to be this kind of, you know, like egoic kind of hierarchical, I can do anything like sort of attitude. But you know, especially in the Chinese scene, and Ollie, you'll know a whole lot more than me, of course. But something I've noticed is like, you know, like the bloodlines and the lineages and this is the one true master, and you know, I sought those kinds of people out myself, and I've seen, you know, like they get the big boulder, like in Baji, for example, they get the big boulder, they get about like a low roof height or a ladder, and I've seen them drop it on top of the master and it just bounces off. And you know, like again, it's like, is that like superhuman strength? Is that like magnificent chi? Is that like some esoteric, you know, god? Or is it just someone that's, you know, done a lot of self-mastery stuff? It's kind of like that integration, right? Like, so I don't really see it as like one or the other. And it's, you know, like I've experienced a bunch of stuff like doing Qigong out in nature, but then it's like it becomes less about and the esoteric part of it, because it just becomes a part of me and how I operate. So is it just me deepening my senses, perceiving more, becoming more aware of who I am, and mastering my own movement, getting more of a direct feedback, that direct experience, and then integrating it and then going deeper? Or is it some woo-woo esoteric thing where I'm like doing some chi ball thing? I just think it's kind of like a paradox, basically. You go deeper, you soften, you're able to perceive more. There's kind of seeing more of what's already there, and it's kind of, like Ollie was alluding to at the beginning, it's like it's a blank slate. It's kind of like a gateway. It's kind of the direct feedback into like physical experience. It can be totally just a way for you to deepen your physical experience, or it could be a totally esoteric spiritual journey of like an internal process that you're going through. So that's kind of it's really the power of the intention is this what I really wanted to hone in, which is what you guys are talking about. Like, are you going into the practice to for longevity reasons? Are you going into the process to get some superhuman skill, or are you simply going into the process because you want to have a daily practice which feeds your body and nourishes your body and makes you stronger? So it's, I just, maybe I'm sort of not really into the scene that much anymore of like the whole chi stuff, but I kind of see that more as maybe more noobs, or maybe people that are sort of more geeky or haven't had really that athleticism kind of thing, or maybe the people that don't have the language to really define what it is that they're doing, or maybe the people that haven't had an esoteric experience before, and then all of a sudden something happens and it's like, oh wow, I'm doing some chi esoteric thing. But it's kind of as you kind of integrate and get more advanced and deeper in your practice and sort of know more of who you are, it just then becomes more about the direct experience, and your everyday life of alchemy gets less about, crazy woo-woo stuff, and just more about, okay, this is just more of who I am. That's kind of how I see it.
I think definitely I agree with the thing about intention. You just said it's like the main point, right? I think it is. I think if I speak to like a Taiwanese student, I'm teaching kung fu stuff, and they're like, "What about this chi stuff?" I'm like, oh, I don't know. I just say, imagine it as the intersection between your body and breath and intention, because obviously breath is a connection between self and other, and inside and outside. It's a metaphor for those things, and you can direct it with your mind. And the point you make about paradoxes, I think, is key. It's the point about having opposites. Anytime you get into anything esoteric, I think or anything that's kind of sort of true in a beautiful way, there's always a paradox there in some way. It's always about things that don't make sense, that combine, and they sort of hold themselves together. They occupy the same space. And I think if you can, and that for me, that resonates with the idea about those Tai Chi guys in the park I train with, who they say do a movement and hold your mind in this way, and about tuning into things and stuff like that. I think definitely intention. I kind of lost my track there, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just what you're as soon as the esoteric starts to take your intention and away from your actual practice and in adherence, that's when it becomes problematic. Something that wasn't your intention. So as long as you are able to keep on with day and actually doing the work, and
I think I lost Nick
all
there.
of these other pieces of it.
Nick, I think you're breaking up a bit.
Yeah, Nick, we're losing just a bit. It's all right, we'll see if he comes back.
All right.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Coming back to intention. It gets into like the whole Star Wars sci-fi thing, like using your Jedi mind tricks to kind of like influence reality around you. And I think that's actually what's going on a little bit here too. Like if you're really plugged in to the universe and you can use your intention and your will, I think those type of sort of supernatural or paranormal abilities I think that's where these stories come from. And I don't know if anyone's around actually doing that today, but just the fact that we still write stories about that. And it comes back to, again, what your senses sort of perceive and then, actively put out. I think that's kind of where some of this stories come from. So I don't know if you've had any experience with that specifically around cultivating cultivating chi to be able to influence reality. But the other side of it is like magnetism. Like when you look, when you catch someone's look, and you feel their look on you, and you can turn around and you can see that someone's looking at you, right? So you see this all the time in like bars or whatever with girls, and you see it with guys too if you sense a threat or something. But I wonder, have you sensed any change in your perception of that in your environment as you've sort of harnessed more of this energy inside of you? Because I feel like that's kind of happening with me a little bit sometimes when I take magic or when I use, sun gazing, that sort of ability to sense at that level. And I haven't tried to, like, for example, if I'm trying to get a bill at a restaurant and I can't get the waiter's attention, I'll stare at their back of their head and I'll put the intention and say, I want to get the bill. And sometimes they look straight at me and then they'll see me, and it's really freaky. I don't know if you ever had any experiences like that specifically, or any thoughts on that?
I have got one. I mean, there's lots of stuff that I don't. It's difficult to talk about because it sounds silly, right? And as a quick preamble to that, I think the whole thing about being all right, the whole thing about being connected to not going too esoteric. I think it's all about building a foundation physically that will allow you, a nervous system, will allow you to put things through it. I've got one that happened not long ago. I do definitely have things where I see perception in a very different way, and I don't know if this is real or not. But I was at a crypto conference, Bitcoin conference, a little bit over a year ago. And there were about 300, 400 people in the room. And there was CZ there who owns Binance, right? And I was like, right, So just played a little game with myself. And I tried to just sort of focus in on him and just go like that. And he looked up and he looked straight at me. And we had a little moment and a little nod. And then later at the after party, there was just like a ring around him, 3 people deep for about half an hour. And then I was on my own. And then someone came up behind me and said, do you want to have a beer? And it was him. And we sat there and had a little beer together. And I don't know if it worked or not, but little things like that, little weird synchronicities happen a lot, especially when I'm really in the training stuff all the time. And essentially, I always think to myself, like, weird things just happen to me all the time. And I don't really care if it's because of training or not. And I always think to myself, this doesn't mean that, and that doesn't mean this. And as soon as something strange happens, and you say, oh, it's God or the devil or it's this or it's that, then at that moment you've lost straight away. And I think your ability to hold on to things, your ability to experience things without putting a label on them is actually the big point. And that's where intention comes in. Because essentially, this is why breath is so important, in my opinion, because if this is your consciousness and your consciousness begins to expand, then at the moment that it expands, you go, oh, and you stop and you look at what's changing. And at that moment, you've frozen it and you're trying to see a snapshot of what's happening. And at that moment, you're not directly in touch with reality. You're having experience in a second-hand way. So if a higher sense of being is about seeing things as they are, being connected to things, then you have to be able to change with things and be more fluid as things are continuing and changing without, just during meditation, for example, without looking at yourself and thinking, oh, what was that? You have to be able to let things go and not attach things to reality and take a step back from your own identity. And then obviously now, we're getting more into the, I don't want to get too down that road because it does get a bit difficult to follow. Well, that was the key point though.
Very easy. I like it.
No, it's so true. I love that. That's really well put. Really well put.
But that's why the breathing thing is I think breathing is the key for me. And I think with the sun, same shit.
It's like, because in Mandarin or Chinese, like in pinyin, like in the writing style, air is what they use for qi. Like it's just, they use that character. So it's just, Yeah. So it's interesting saying that breath. Yeah. Excuse me.
Well, the chi in the air is quite powerful. I think if you do breathing exercise outside, you can pull in a lot more chi. Some of the, because I haven't practiced Tai Chi or anything like that formally or with an instructor, I just mess around outside, right, in the garden. And some of the times that I've been able to sort of manifest really powerful energy flowing through my hands, like where it feels like it's sort of lightning in my hands, and I'm moving around a little bit, creating chi balls and stuff. It's all just been doing breathing exercises outside and with the sun, like very heavy sunlight as well. And having done like a yoga routine so that again the body, you know, is very fluid and there's a lot of energy flowing through it. So under those sort of environments, yeah, the breath, it's the most powerful thing. I've never come close to sort of that sort of stillness or that presence that you get when you really tap into the breath. And I'm just playing around. I mean, I'm not training or using any sort of informal instruction and stuff. So I'm sure there's some really powerful stuff out there. I think Nick also mentioned he's taken a breathing course, so he can probably do a show on that. Maybe how we can sort of harness that energy out there, like Wim Hof's talking about a little bit. But it's the link between the voluntary and involuntary, and that comes to what you're saying a bit, Ollie, about like when you try and collapse the moment that's happening and then try to sort of identify or define it, then you've instantly come out of that state that you were in. So it's like we have, you know, almost like different states of being or consciousness, and there's a pure experiencing and being present and feeling it, and then the mind kind of gets in there and wants to try to understand what's going on and then, you know, write it down or something or like define it, but it's almost like you're grasping at something you can't ever grasp at. And the breath is exactly like that. It's like voluntary and involuntary, and it's happening all the time, and you don't even realize you're doing it. And then you can also sort of consciously, you know, take over the breathing and take yourself to certain places just by controlling the rhythm. Like I do a breathing exercise now at the end of my yoga routine where I sort of lie like I'm kneeling, and then I lie all the way back, so my legs are kind of bent backwards, and it's quite painful for me. Like I couldn't even do it for a few seconds at first, and then I sort of used breath to get through that pain, and then I just went deeper and deeper and slowed the breath down. And now I do like 21 really, really slow breaths at the end of that. That's my final sort of routine of the exercise every day. And it just feels like I'm transported somewhere. It just feels like I'm in total bliss state, and I come out of that and I'm just like, wow, I just went somewhere. And you can do that every day without drugs, right? It's just like pure high on chi, on nature. So yeah, I mean, just simple things like that every day. When you're talking about like practical ways to cultivate this, you don't need to spend 10 years in a monastery or something. You can just go outside and start fucking around and see what happens. Nature, you know, nature has it all there for you.
That's a really interesting anecdote, Mike. It reminds me of, Ollie's probably experienced it. I mean, the styles of martial arts I did, like, you know, it's the same thing with stretching. Like, you know, you got your back against the wall, one foot down, you put the other one, and someone else is pushing up to touch the wall behind you. So it's like a vertical split. And like you said, it's that you'd say to someone, breathe, like regulate your breathing through it, and you find your breaths get deeper and deeper, and like you might be like screaming, shouting, groaning, but there's like and you know, they'll say it's like a pleasure from the pain. But I'm thinking that's kind of thing, you know, when like that phrase, you know, people, you know, get pleasure from the pain, probably because it causes you to take deeper breaths, so you make yourself higher. It may actually be an interesting part of it, of why that is. But yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think breath is just has. Sorry, go on, Nick.
I was just going to bring into the conversation is what Ollie briefly mentioned earlier, and what Mike was talking about is like the flow, and just kind of like a little nuance here in the difference between like the cultivation and the harnessing and the control versus allowing what wants to happen to be there and seeing it and allowing it to flow. Because I think there's like a slight nuance in there, especially when we get into things like harnessing and cultivation, there's like a tendency to like, you know, start manipulating energy or the need to kind of cultivate power, and then it kind of gets into the ego and the kind of I'm building up my chi and I'm making this happen, and I'm so there's this kind of like a little nuance in there in kind of seeing what shows up, directly experiencing it and allowing it to flow through it and kind of being at one with it, so to speak, versus cultivating and harnessing everything around me to, you know, in a masculine way, kind of force some kind of issue or force an intention or kind of make this thing happen. And that's kind of where I see things get a little skewed in this.
Sorry, I can't tell if you finished because it's a little bit crackly. The last word was this, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the just what you were saying in the last thing you said as well, right? The male egoistic way of kind of having a hierarchical kind of self-determining thing with martial arts, and it takes it away from what it's really about. I think being able to, difference between forcing an intention through harnessing power and chi. It's about I guess the flow for me is about submitting, and you need that female energy to be able to receive something without, because if you go too far in one direction, if you go too masculine, you're just trying to establish that which is there to dominate what's around you, and there's no relationship between it. Eventually you become brittle. And if you go too far in the other way, it's the opposite. You just become like the wind. And if you can balance that, it's again that same point of having yourself, of the breathing, being able to change something while being changed by it. And I think the flow thing is when your identity and the outside world kind of mix together, and you're able to just let go of who you are and who you think you should be. But yeah.
So at one point, maybe I wanted to run past you as well, Ollie, like this idea of yin and yang and those influences, you said kind of the masculine and feminine. If you're constantly forcing your will and your intention, that's a sort of very yang, outward expression of our energy, of our being, right? And then there's like the sort of maybe surrendering or the sort of passive receiving energy from the universe, and that's maybe more yin. And that balance between the two, obviously, like men are obviously on one side towards being more yang by default, and women are towards the other side of yin. So just the idea of like men and women coming together, it creates balance, right? And that's why we obviously seek partnerships. But this idea of yin and yang within the body, and then how is that related to chi? Do you have any way to sort of explain that, or is it too woo woo?
No, sure. I mean, there's a lot to say about that. First of all, how it relates to martial arts and the idea of sort of surrendering to things. If you just try to attack someone, then it's pretty obvious what you're going to do. If someone tries to hit you, if you wait until the last moment for someone to hit you, and then you move out of the way, they're going to be more committed. When you see people who do martial arts and it's really beautiful, it's really effective, they're really in tune with what's happening. You can't do that without allowing that person to attack you in some way. If you just try to shut them down too much, it's weakness because you're being too aggressive because you're afraid. So that's one example of yin and yang. But more specifically within traditional martial arts, it's the entire body is broken down into yin and yang. So that the front of the body is more yin, the back of the body is yang. When you have the microcosmic orbit, the energy goes around the body, it falls down the front and rises up the back of the body. The inside of the arm is more yin, the outside is more yang. It's all about being able to receive different types of energy. And it's all also limited or shaped by your pre-existing kind of state, like how much chi or how much whatever can you flow through your system before you get tense and freeze up. And then also within the dynamics between opposing parties, fighting partners, your opponent, that's also a flowing interplay of yin and yang. And so the whole point of yin and yang is it flows and changes all the time. And so the more you can kind of recognize those elements and how they're mixed, this is just from the perspective of traditional Chinese Kung Fu, the more you're able to become harmonized with it. And when you can harmonize with something, then you can overcome it. That's the idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just thinking about it now, like the in breath is almost very yin because you're receiving energy from the universe, and the yang is like you're pushing it out. And a lot of, I know, strikes in martial arts have to do with like pushing out during the breath, or when you're receiving a strike, how to protect yourself is like using the breath, right? So I don't know, Lynn maybe or Ollie has something to say around that. It's like how you can harness the breath and this principle of yin and yang to sort of balance out or defend yourself. And then how do you use that same principle maybe to cultivate energy? Maybe I just don't understand it well enough, but just throwing it out there.
Sure. Well, well, within qigong, you have the dantian, which is kind of the first point in the body to know about when you're talking about qi. And it's an inch or two below the belly button and an inch or two inside, and that's where it's stored. I'm really not an expert actually on the internal Chinese medicine side of qigong. It's something I'm learning about now. But essentially, you build up qi in that part of the body, and you do it by being relaxed and by I think also understanding the difference between Jing, Qi, and Shen. Shen
That's
is
really
the
important.
mind.
If you can break it down for us. Yeah, go on.
Sure. So Shen, we already talked about Qi a lot. Shen, Qi, we can say in this context, Qi is, let's just call it an electromagnetic kind of energy impulse. Shen is about the mind force or the spirit. And again, it's always important to think of the Chinese stuff in terms of metaphors. It's just about having a relationship to measure things against. It doesn't have to be accepted completely. But essentially the idea of Shen, it's spirit, it's intention, it's mind. It's, people, when people talk about more esoteric stuff, they're going more into Shen often. And the idea that you can actually move your Shen, you can do all sorts of funky things with Shen. That's kind of it's not the same as mental. And you have Jing, when Jing is more physical. Jing is the element of, not the element, but the aspect of kind of physical essence within your body. The idea in kind of Taoist longevity, when a man ejaculates, he loses his life essence, and that's Shen. Sorry, that's Jing. So Jing can never be replenished. You have a finite amount of Jing in your body, and once it's gone, it's gone. Chen can be replenished. It's also lost during sex for men, but it can be replaced. A baby is very kind of soft and has soft joints. It's kind of chubby, and that's considered a very strong manifestation of Jin, because a baby has a very high amount of Jin, and you're trying, when you're doing Taoist longevity exercises, to bring yourself back to that state. And the idea is by doing these breathing exercises, you push qi into your dantian. You don't overdo it, because if you overdo it and exceed your capacity, then you can cause yourself an injury. By staying within 70% of your capacity, you don't overdo it and burn out. And I do a type of breathing called Taoist longevity breathing, where essentially at the end of each breath, you're kind of breathing in and out at the same time, basically. It's not true circular breathing. As you breathe in, you're breathing in, but your abdomen is already relaxing. So it's kind of pushing the air out, and then vice versa on the other way, and at the other point. When you're doing that while meditating.
Did you do like circular breathing, that kind of thing, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a more advanced or a more kind of hard form of circular breathing. But yeah, but the point of the breathing is that it's when you're meditating and doing this very, very slow, deep breathing, deep into your abdomen and relaxing, you have a real sense of that interplay between the yin and the yang. There's these different things happening at the same time. And so you have it's a continuous motion. And that's a key part of Tai Chi, because everything flows into each other. So it's going up, then it's mixing with going down, and you actually experience the interplay. And by experiencing the interplay, you can figure out the parameters within both. So all that stuff is important for Qi in the body.
So you said Jing, Shen, and the third one is Qi or something else?
Third one is Qi. Jing, Qi, Shen.
Yeah. So when you're cultivating Qi, you're not necessarily cultivating Jing or Shen. And that's also interesting that, those are really powerful forces in the body that are not really explained at all in the West. Even if people have some idea of Qi, I think Jing and Shen are somewhat maybe more mystical or harder to quantify. But like you mentioned, you deplete it when you ejaculate. For men, women obviously don't have that same problem. But yeah, I think that's something I'm curious about. Like, I've read a lot of different books and ideas around this and what's practical to actually implement. Unless you're going to be celibate and not have sex. I mean, how do you protect your Jing? It doesn't seem like there's any way around that specifically. But I'm curious how Qi can maybe protect the body's energy in some ways. So you're depleting less Jing and Shen. Do you have any thoughts on how that's possible at all? And even things with like breathing, because when we're stressed, we're breathing very shallow. It's not even going into the dantian. It's not even going down that far. So just something as simple as like a breathing exercise that lets you bring the oxygen and energy down deeper into that part of the body and move it there. versus like that shallow, tight breathing that we normally have just because we're not relaxed or something. Something as simple as that can really help.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd say that even in China, they're pretty well confused. I think the only way to really understand them is to be able to speak classical Chinese and to read the classics, because they experience them pretty well, I hear. And you can't really understand them if it's not classical Chinese that you're reading it in. But the other important point is that you can alchemize, using alchemy, you can turn Shen into Qi. And to a lesser extent, depending on who you're talking to, you can turn Qi into Jing. And you can increase Jing simply by eating food. And that also increases Qi. The point is they all mix together. And then when you're talking more about the esoteric things, you take a step out of yourself and you're here, and here's like your energy field or whatever, and you can call that Qi. You're already taking a step out of yourself. So you're a step closer to getting more into really esoteric stuff. And because everything is connected, that's why it's very easy to mistake Qi stuff for mystical. Mystical things and very esoteric woo-woo things. But, everything's connected. So you're going into your Qi stuff, and, the Shen stuff is where it gets more funky. So you might meditate, you might breathe, you might do some Qigong, and then you might kind of try to manifest that physically into your body. You might try to tune into something in your mind, connect it to your body in the breath, and then settle it down and sink it and so manifest it in. But that's very abstract, right? One thing you can do as a man with sex is learn to separate orgasm and ejaculation. You can do like the deer exercise. So you basically do breathing and you basically do Kegels. You do a Kegel, you hold it in, and you kind of hold that Kegel for as long as you can until the muscles just start to relax, and you breathe out again. And you just keep doing that. And it's pretty easy, pretty quick if you stick with it to actually be able to separate them. You do still lose some Jing when you do that. You definitely lose Qi. A Taoist master or whatever would... Sorry?
I spell key. What's sorry? Kegel.
Kegel.
Qigong.
No, you said you separate it. You said you hold the Kegel. So you're right?
Oh, a Kegel. A Kegel is just the exercise that you, for your prostate.
How just? Oh,
So,
okay. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I should have explained that. The muscle, for people who don't know, it's basically when you stop peeing, that's the muscle that you use.
Yeah.
So you can identify it doing that, and then you learn to work it.
Got it.
So you do, but the thing is just having a strong prostate and getting good at Kegels won't get you to that point. You have to combine it with intention and try and do some, if you have Qigong skills already, it makes it much easier.
Sure.
And then that's the key, sexual energy is considered to be the strongest, is considered to be the life force. Same thing with sort of ancient Egyptians. I think you know more about that, Michael, about people increasing that through the sun if they did that in ancient Egypt.
Dude, I've got some crazy stories going on in my life right now. I don't want to go there. Yeah, all I can say.
That'll be the next one.
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy energy. So yeah, I'm curious how that ties into Jing and Shen and Qi and that philosophy. But like, in the West, we measure with testosterone as like a sign of sexual energy or libido or drive. And when you look at the sun consistently and you eat the right foods, I mean, it just goes off the charts. So I'm trying to figure out how to manage energy better in my life, because it's really powerful and it's kind of overwhelming at some points.
Yeah,
so yeah.
for the sake of your wife, right? I guess, yeah, jeez.
Well, there's one guy I would definitely recommend looking at. He's called Bruce Francis, and he does a lot of Taoist sexual Qigong. And that's the idea of actually, if two people can both do Qigong, then you're able to exchange that energy, and basically the same thing of like sexual energy, but do it on a more refined level. That's the idea behind it. And it's pretty interesting in terms of sort of understanding the dynamics of yin and yang. And it also helps just to have a basic Qigong practice. Like the yoga stuff, for example, is pretty good. Problem is that when you've got too much, just yoga in itself is good. But I think when you have too much energy coming in, your body gets you can feel like it's too much for your system. And what that is you've got yourself to a point where you can take in energy from whatever source, but you're in danger of kind of frying yourself a bit. You can literally injure yourself that way. So you have to be pretty aware of what's happening and not try. I think if you don't try too hard to really force it, it's okay. Just similar to what Nick was implying. If you want to increase that base, then the key is standing exercises is probably the best place to start, because you just learn to stand and you learn how it feels to sink your chi. When you have a lot of emotion in your chest, then that's your chi is rising. Like maybe it's just emotion, right? That's the point. It doesn't matter. You just learn to sink it, and you learn to push your energy into your feet, and there are certain postures that you can hold, and that increases your capacity. And within that, never, especially if you're doing if you have that kind of stuff going on, never doing that when you're super tired, because that will just deplete your jing way quicker. And essentially, this is just what I was told. Yeah.
You mean like grounding your energy and putting it into the earth as a way of diffusing energy, but you don't want to do that when you don't have enough coming in?
If you're doing sexual qigong stuff and you're exhausted, that's considered to be a no-no. And especially doing anything to do with qi 2.5 to 3 hours after sex is considered to be a no-no. And assuming that's all in place, if you can sink, it's a specific practice. You do it with the deep breathing, you relax your body, you relax your mind, you sink the energy down, and you feel heavy, you feel connected to the ground. And that's what Tai Chi is all about. Tai Chi is very good at that. You can also just do standing postures. People even say that the way people would meditate in the past, Nick's saying they would do standing meditation for 12 hours a day. Yeah, like people, anyone who's really, really good in terms of internal martial arts, like they've done standing meditation for a really, really long time. And that is essentially, it kind of opens you up. My Tai Chi teacher at the moment, he has like cracks on his skull, big cracks, because he just teaches standing stuff. And he said that he had one moment, and then from one day to another, these cracks appeared on his head. And
what the hell? What was he doing?
It was just an overflow of energy, according to him. And he was just doing standing meditation. Standing
on his head, or just standing?
No, just standing.
Wow.
Just standing. But you stand in a specific posture, people describe Tai Chi as being like a tree. So like you've got the roots connecting to the earth, and you've got the leaves which are connecting to the universal energy or whatever. And your ability to do one is limited by your capacity for the other. So
I'm cultivating so much chi, my head is exploding.
Yeah. Basically. And then at that point, he actually took a step back. So, but like I say, like I don't know. I don't take anything. I just say, all right, okay, this is what someone said to me. Maybe, as soon as you start getting into that state of mind of it being, this is the thing, this is the guy, then you've kind of lost. But if you can hold that position in your mind equally, then you can say, oh yeah, okay, maybe, sounds good, I'll give it a go. Then you open yourself up to a lot more. And I think that thing of intention, being able actually to tune into things that maybe aren't as measurable, is kind of pretty. I think that's a prerequisite for it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I need to look into it more. Like you said, probably a lot of it's written in classical Chinese and hard to access if you're not in that culture. So that's probably why I haven't gone deep into it. But then all this stuff's around you in nature anyway, so you can experience it experientially. You maybe just don't have a system to kind of refine it in a more organized way, other than just letting nature refine you. That's kind of my philosophy now, is that nature's kind of built perfect. So if I'm just exposed to it enough and just keep getting myself into it, like some people can't even be under the sun for a couple of hours or more now because they're just too denatured. And I think that's how far away we've come from being able to cultivate this basic energy from the universe inside of us. So my principle is, how do I just get back to that state where I can be outside all the time? And there's a crazy amount of energy. You just feel it now. I'm under the shade. I can feel the heat because it's quite hot here in Portugal. But I was out maybe for like 6-7 hours yesterday under like pretty high UV sun, and I'm not burning anymore. So, I'm pretty used to the heat. But the amount of energy you can absorb, it's just kind of ridiculous how much energy is out there. And obviously the body's designed to work with that, right? So just our physiology is all built around that. And when you come away from that, your body is going to break down quicker. It's going to dysregulate. And I think a lot of what Tai Chi is trying to do is maybe just strengthen that foundation so that you can experience life and enjoy life more, and your senses can. I think when you have more energy available to you, then your senses can kind of stretch themselves to perceive and interact in different ways. It's what I kind of was talking about with that Star Wars concept of like using your intention to like change, intention around you. Almost like you can fuck with people if you wanted to, but you don't have to use it like that. But just the idea that if you have that much power available to you and you refined it, you can do some very interesting things with your mind and your intention. And just at the point of like looking with your eyes and using that intention, I think that's also amplified when you sun gaze, because you're taking in so much energy through the eyes, and the magnetism around that energy is a part of vision and eyesight that's not talked about at all. But there's many layers to each sense, if that's the best way I can put it. And we're maybe only using very small or basic parts of that right now, because we don't have enough energy flowing through it to play around with the other parts for ourselves.
Yeah, I do a lot of Shen stuff actually when I'm doing sun gazing, or I'm not good enough to look at the sun at midday or whatever. I do it with the moon or with different things. Sort of there's a certain practice you can do where you sort of try to send your intention over somewhere, and then it kind of comes back at you, and you get a more interesting sort of feeling. I think the thing is never to go past 70%, so you're never going into strain. But I just wanted to add the thing about
what intention do you put into the sun specifically? I'm just curious.
Just literally the idea of Shen, which is like once you have like a feeling for what it might be. And I'm not saying I know, but what I think it is, I'll send it. The idea is you can be sitting somewhere and you can sort of send your consciousness to the other side of the road. You can send it over here. You can send it over there, and you can send it at something, and then you'll send it. Like, for example, people say like light is data, the sun is data, right? So by that logic, if you send your intention over it somewhere, it's going to reflect back at you, like sonar. And so it's going to come back at you, and you're going to just get, if you're really in a meditative state, you can kind of just play with that sort of thing. And, I'm sure plenty of people will listen to this and think, nah, I'm not buying it. But I definitely, I think you can definitely do some stuff with that. And the idea of opening your senses is related to that. But yeah, definitely the 70% thing is the key. As soon as you start going past 70% of your capacity, then you're slowing down your growth, because you're going to freeze up. Your nervous system is going to close. So if you always stay within that sweet spot, then your 70% will be way bigger than your 100% in short order. And I think I just wanted to add about that leads into the idea of Taoism. For me, it's always been about Taoism, because Taoism is a philosophy of nature, and these people have these practices, and it's technology. Essentially, it's just technology. And like I said, back in the day, everybody was doing this stuff, or lots of people were doing this stuff, and they have all sorts of practices and all sorts of really amazing things. And for me, that's why I do martial arts. I think that doing the sun gazing stuff, I don't know much about that actually, but they definitely have all sorts of practices related to it. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what you come up with if you look into that. And I saw Nick also had an approving nod. I was wondering if he had anything to throw in there.
No, I was just approving, brother. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm just in agreement. I don't really have much to add other than the fact that I just sort of picked up on something that you said about, like some people might not agree with it. I think just something that I'm catching within myself is that we tend to get a little concerned about everyone thinking that it's all woo-woo, but like sending our intention into something and sort of, putting our consciousness into the sun or getting a reflection, that's just completely normal as far as I'm concerned. And just to kind of, just back you up on that. And, like astral projection and things like military programs and the development of those kind of psychic skills and all of that. It's an innate skill that we all have, that we're all capable of. It's just something that maybe some people aren't aware of yet, and there's tons of science behind it, and it's all tried and tested. So like putting your intention into the sun and getting and reflecting something back, or sort of deliberately putting your consciousness into kind of sending and receiving is just part and parcel. So good on you, man.
Yeah, definitely. And even to back that up, if you want to back up with a bit of sciencey, if the need's there, obviously there's a theory that the observed atom reacts differently to an unobserved atom. There's massive war fronts on whether people agree or disagree with it, but that kind of goes through to what we're saying. If that's just simply something being observed, not having the intention sent to it. So it could completely. It's not something that's never been mentioned that is completely what people perceive as woo-woo. It is discussed by physicists and so on. And so it's definitely. If that's a concern for anyone, not that it is, but on Watch, for example, it's something that's not brand new theory being brought up right here, right now. It's kind of old, even in the astrophysicists,
Because it's interesting about using intention, and if that is Shen, like what you described, this other sort of part of that energy, and then you're using that intention around you. Like when I put intention into the sun, I think you can do a couple of things with that, right? You can obviously, I put a lot of gratitude and appreciation for the fact that it's just showering me with energy and light and information, but also being grateful to be able to receive that. And I think that people don't know how to use that Shen, if you like, to kind of maybe change the ability to receive light in a way that's less harmful, for example. So if you're quite sensitive to the sun, or you're worried about being burned by the sun, I think you could even use that Shen if you cultivated it or you believed it, to be able to let your body receive that light without it being damaging, to obviously be sensible with it, but to like lean into that more with more trust and more faith that light is good for you and that you can receive it, without the damaging effects. And you can use things like magic, again, to enhance your ability to receive radiation. Like I can look into the sun much stronger when I'm on magic and stuff like that. And people say, oh no, your pupils are dilated, don't do that, it's dangerous or something, right? So it just depends which level of comfort you're at and what you trust and what you approach with maybe skepticism or fear, how much that lets you really lean into something. But that concept of Shen and like projecting your attention into the sun, it's super powerful. I mean, I didn't even call it Shen. I'm just doing it just by default. But I sense that is allowing me to connect with the sun much deeper without any sort of downside. I don't worry about, oh, I've been in the sun too long. Am I going to get cancer now? Like some people, oh shit, I need to go put some sunscreen on. It's been 3 hours or something. Like I don't have any of that anymore. And I used to, because I used to just be fed up all the bullshit fears and conditioning that society puts into you. But when you really get past that, you realize there's so much power out there where we're deliberately disconnected from a lot of it. And I think maybe a lot of this knowledge is still kept secret in some form, away from the people to really disconnect them from their true power. Because if we really are gods in that sense and we're connected to nature, there's who knows where the limit is, in terms of our senses, what they can reach, and what seems supernatural or paranormal, is within all of us, like that psychic ability, and there's many different elements of that. So I would just say, you have to let go of the fear to be and the worry about being judged by other people as being weird, maybe, or just whatever stops you leaning into that. And if you let people talk you out of it because they think it's dangerous or you're crazy or whatever it is, your immediate environment is really important to like not have those influences around, so you can experiment and use your own intuition, use your own feedback. So obviously, don't stay in the sun too long if you feel like you've had enough. Your body will tell you, hey, I've had enough now. Even for me, sometimes I'll come inside if I've been outside for a long time. But I feel like that ability to use your Shen is almost changing something in your physical environment in your body to be able to receive more light in this specific context. That's just an example I'm throwing out there. So that's for me is fascinating to hear you put it that way as well. Like what Shen's all about.
I mean, I'm definitely not. There are people out there who are way more knowledgeable than I am about this. But for me, like the idea is just to focus on the basics and just practice the Qi, practice the Jing, figure out the difference between how to manipulate it with your body and stuff. And I think actually since about the last year, I've started getting more into the sun gazing thing. And just being outside in the sun for a really long time. And definitely when I'm thinking about, when I'm doing that and I'm kind of tuning into myself in kind of like a chi way or whatever, just the kind of the hard to define sort of things I think about when I'm doing the training, it's very strong. Has a very big positive effect. And based on my research, I was wondering what you think about this. Basically, the sun isn't bad for you unless you burn yourself. So, like,
That's the 70% you're
how
talking
you
about,
think?
right? Yeah, I mean, that's the
Yes.
70% you're talking about, like any stress. So your nervous system has to be able to handle the stress, and then your physiology has to be able to respond to it. So we have a bunch of inbuilt things like to make melanin to absorb UV so it's not harmful, and then we can, dissipate it and actually use it as potential energy, right? Because melanin can split the water molecule, and you can make almost a limited amount of energy that way. But if those pathways to make melanin are not working or they're not optimized because you've been indoors and eaten a bunch of shitty food your whole life and you've quite denatured, then you very slowly have to build that back up, right? You can't just jump out into the sun because you'll fry yourself because the body's not responding. It's not strong enough to be able to respond to that stress. So I think the sun is just the most powerful stress in our environment, right? The amount of radiation that thing's throwing off it's insane. And obviously people that are super denatured, they're not going to be able to handle that stress, and it's going to fill them with fear. So they're going to use sunscreen and other things that just makes them weaker. But you take that concept of 70%, whatever you can tolerate, and then you work, okay, what are those pathways? How can I optimize my body for those pathways, right? So for me, like things like saturated fat, like fungi, like lion's mane to regrow your nervous system. All those things are kind of key to maximizing your threshold, so you don't reach 70% in 30 minutes like most people, but you reach it maybe in 5 hours or 6 hours or 7 hours, right? And then you've been able to spend so much time outside, you can then benefit from all the other chi in the environment, like from the fresh air there, from whatever else is there, the wind that only makes you cold. People have to go inside because it's too cold or something. Like, it's all just a function of like denaturing. So understanding where our bodies are broken down and then how to kind of renature it and nurture it back to health. And the foods in your environment obviously is important, like things like raw milk, for example, to just make your brain work better. And you combine those with like mushrooms, like fungi, it's super powerful. Like I said, when I'm on magic, even my ability to harness radiation is way more powerful. And that's what mushrooms are doing all day long. They're just literally the masters of harnessing radiation. That's how they can live outside the atmosphere, where there's no ozone. We would just die out there in seconds. These things are just out there just soaking up radiation all day long, and they can just live like that, right? And that's how they populate the universe. So when you understand that this type of intelligence is there, and we have some connection, I talked about mushrooms in the last show, we have some connection to that through our DNA lines, and that's part of our ancestry, is actually mushrooms are our ancestors in some form. Then we have all this physiology built into us, and we can use these tools to kind of like strengthen our physiology, so our threshold is basically much higher. And yeah, you can get to that 70%, not in 30 minutes, but in hours. So I think that from just a basic physiology perspective, like I was saying about melanin, that's like the pigmentation, right? That's like the darkness of your skin. So as we moved away from the equator, we obviously lost the adaptation because the body needed to make itself lighter to be able to absorb more UV. So when your skin's darker, it takes you longer to absorb UV, which means if you're in a higher latitude condition with less UV, your body needs to have less pigmentation to absorb that UV. So it's just a process of gradual evolution away from the equator that's made some people white and some people, still brown or black. But either way, it's like understanding your biological adaptations based on your genes and your evolution, and then your environment, and then what are the things that's going to work for you. So you're always moving towards your biological adaptations. And that's my whole sort of philosophy now. And I talk about that on Facebook. It's like, understand that part. How do you move towards it? And what's taking you away from it, right? What are the stresses of your environment that basically reduce that threshold? Because you can't, then you can't expose yourself to things like the sun for too long if you don't have that basic sort of foundation. But yeah, it's interesting for me to kind of see from where I went to, like everyone else, couldn't look at the sun, wore sunglasses all the time, to like now just looking at the sun middle of the day for hours and being totally fine. And people think that's probably supernatural, paranormal or something, or just, they don't think it's possible for them. But I don't think that's true at all. Like, babies are born with a huge amount of melanin. If you look at like the fetus inside the womb, the first blob is this massive black blob, and that's melanin. That's the same blackness is like a black hole that's like absorbing all the radiation and light, so nothing's reflected outside of it. That's why it looks black, right? That's why black holes are black. It's the same thing with melanin. It's absorbing all the radiation, all the heat inside of it, and that's in your eyeball from day one, right? So then we just lose that because as soon as the kid's born, you're like, oh, don't look at the sun. Here's some sunglasses. I see parents putting sunglasses on their babies now. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. But anyways, I'm ranting a little bit. So that's definitely a point to consider, is like how far away we've come, and then obviously generationally, if our parents are treating kids like that with their knowledge or lack of knowledge, how kids obviously being born into the world weaker and sicker, and then it's a harder journey to get back to that threshold.
It'd be interesting to see if there's a connection between melanin and gin. maybe that's a thing. I'm going to check it out.
It's definitely related to energy, right? So whether you call it Jing, Qi or Shen, like that system, your ability to capture energy, potential energy, if you understand how melanin works, it's like potential energy, or like a battery. That's what the Egyptians were doing when they were sun gazing. They're actually using batteries too to enhance the conductivity, so they could move energy, more strongly through the body and be able to harness it more. But melanin is basically, they're using melanin in solar cells now, so they understand the technology of it as a battery, and the skin is like a battery in that sense. You have melanin in your eyeballs, but you also have all over your skin, right? So it's like you have photoreceptors that then capture light, and then using that process of melanogenesis is like turning that into melanin, and that melanin can constantly, like I said, split the water molecule. So how we make energy, if you understand those pathways, is not just through eating food and turning calories into energy. Like that's a very simplistic, almost backup form of survival way to generate the ATP and energy. But the body can do this, very, very easily with melanin, and it's very efficient, and there's much less sort of metabolic byproduct or waste which you make when you're eating all the time. So if you don't have those systems, you're going to age much quicker, because you're going to need because you're going to have a deficit of energy from those systems. You're going to need food and calories a lot more. I think that's what we're kind of seeing, is just people have come so far away from that. So even basic practices to cultivate chi, you'll probably find you won't need to eat the same way, as in like, oh, I'm so tired now, I'm bonking, I need a Snickers or a Coke or something, right? Like the way people, or coffee or something to pick me up, like that type of deficit is what people are living in today. So even just the basic cultivation, like what you're doing with chi, can help you build up that stronger natural energy. But things like melanin, that molecule itself is so powerful, and we're born with it. And then we kind of lose the ability to create melanin, because it's a whole pathway that you need certain enzymes, you need certain molecules, and they have to be working. And it's actually exposure to nature that upregulates and strengthens those systems. So the more you're in sun, the stronger your body's ability to make melanin is. And that's why it's a gradual process to get to that 70%, just with consistency. So it's something you really need to be doing every day. Like, our bodies are not designed to get sun 1 week a year on holiday and then live inside 51 weeks a year. Like, that's just craziness. So it's like what we're trying to do to make up for that deficit in 1-2 weeks holiday is never going to be enough for the body to regenerate that pathway.
Makes me think that there are different, super interesting about melanin. And it makes me think about this idea of there being different energy pathways within the body, only a few of which are taken seriously. Like, for example, the endocannabinoid system, that's a pre-existing thing. And then people talk about all the health benefits of CBD or marijuana or whatever. And, that's something that has a lot of really strong health benefits, but it's an entire pre-existing system within the body. You're talking about fungus. It's a pre-existing physiology that exists within us. And, then there's chi. And then when I was doing a lot of research into nutrition, I kind of came to the conclusion that your cell, one of the key things for being, fat adapted or eating a lot of fruit, is it's actually, there are different energy pathways. And if you can go down one, then go down the other, you have a wider range of cell flexibility to choose whichever one, depending on what the conditions are. You have to open that gateway, I suppose. And so there are so many different pathways within the body for energy, and likewise the mind. And it seems like what you're implying, and I would agree, there's pretty base and simplistic kind of set of pathways being sort of, there's more to it than just food, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, we're stuck on diet and exercise as the paradigms for health, and that it's completely excluding light. So not just sunlight, but the effect of incoherent light like EMF and radiation that's not native to our physiology, that we have no biological adaptation for. So the more of those things you're exposed to, the more of your body's you have sort of master molecule antioxidants like glutathione and melatonin, the two main ones I talk about all the time. And they're the things that clean up all the mess always going on inside the body. So whether you're exposed to the sun, you get radiation, you have damage from that. The melatonin is always cleaning up. and melanin is preventing the damage in the first place. And if you're constantly under blue light, for example, your melatonin is getting depleted. You're not going to have enough to expose yourself to the stress from the sun. So it's like you got to pick your poison, right? You're either going to get depleted by non-native EMF, or you're going to have to, save your melatonin for being under the sunlight for 5, 6, 7 hours a day and use it for that. And that's what it's designed to be used for. So there's just no real beneficial response from shitty light and junk light that we're living under, but there's a bunch of benefits from being under, sunlight if you can tolerate it. So like, yeah, anyone can take their Dutch test and test their melatonin levels. You can test your glutathione levels and see like how much resilience you have for these stresses. And then okay, I need to, first of all, fix my sleep, fix my environment, build my melatonin back up, and then I can get back out into the sun. And my body's going to be able to, like, melatonin is also needed for fatty acid oxidation. So you can't really be a fat burner if you don't have melatonin. It's just basic things, people are trying to like use diet and exercise to fix everything. And there's such an incomplete science, and it's failing so many people. That's why people are so sick. And so we're talking about some pretty like advanced stuff to do with chi and things that are interesting, but you're going to probably struggle to cultivate chi if you haven't got like your diet and your environment sort of optimal for that, to be able to play with this stuff, because yeah, you might not be able to sense it. You might not be able to build it as easily. And again, these are things that they're not really covered in tradition because we never really had the problems that we do today, right? So what I always say with like Chinese medicine and Ayurveda is like they're really useful systems, but they were built for a certain time. And that those times they didn't have these stresses we have today. So yeah, so like Nick says, everyone's trying to compensate with smart drugs. So you have modafinil, you have all this concepts of like, yeah, we can just take smart drug, increase productivity, and make the brain work. But actually, you're depleting the brain's molecules and the substrates for the neurotransmitters. You just use that shit up faster, so that there's no free lunch there. But when you learn how to generate these things naturally, like where the hormones come from, those pathways, I talk about vitamin D all the time. I talk about, melatonin, dopamine, serotonin, these things, the proteins that are required to make them, then the conditions you need to like not deplete them. I think that's where people really have very limited understanding, even though the science is all there actually now. And it's quite interesting. That's why I share a lot on my Facebook, like all the stuff that I'm reading. But if you just understand how not to deplete it, then you just need to be in a natural enough environment so that it's kind of building up every day. And then, yeah, you might get a breakthrough where, let's say you're super sun sensitive and you just can't be in the sun. And all of a sudden, after a few months of doing the right things, you'd be outside of the sun and like, oh, I'm not getting burned, and you're taking the right sort of things to accelerate that process, things like astaxanthin to help, reduce inflammation and damage that can be done from the sun. If you don't have high levels of melatonin and glutathione, you probably need things like that to kind of help you boost that, that tolerance. So there's different ways of kind of hacking it, but you're always trying to upregulate your body's own endogenous production of these things, and not just like overriding it to try and like, amplify or jack up your nervous system with coffee or smart drugs to be able to make your brain work again, because your environment is kind of, destroyed that body's ability to, to keep itself well. But yeah, we're going off some tangents here. I don't know if you guys want to keep chatting. I'm happy to keep chatting, but it's all connected. So
I wanted to say about chi. Like, I think that a lot of the time people get like acupressure and acupuncture and stuff, and they it doesn't work for them because they don't have that foundation. I also wanted to chat quick if you guys have 5 minutes after we stop recording. I guess I don't know if there's anything else anyone wanted to say. But in conclusion, you were saying, Michael, that essentially you have a limited amount of melatonin and it will get depleted one way or the other.
Yeah, your body can make it. So yeah, your body can make it. Obviously, you need serotonin, first of all. So the gut makes serotonin and the brain makes a bit of it too. But if the gut's not working because you fucked it up glyphosate or something, you can't make serotonin, then you've got nothing left to convert to melatonin. And then if you don't have very strong light-dark cycles, again, the melatonin gets dysregulated. So a lot of people, their pineal gland gets fucked up from fluoride and tap water. Their glyphosate is fucking up their serotonin in their gut, so they can't make it. So they're not making any melatonin. And then if you don't have, it gets used up over time. That's why old people can't sleep properly, because they have no melatonin left. But you can regenerate those systems so your body's making melatonin itself. And most people are just trying to take a melatonin supplement because they don't understand how to actually fix the body. But yeah, if you're depleting over time, you're gonna have less and less tolerance to the sun. And you'll see babies like where I'm now, like got family visiting me, some family, and the kids outside it's totally fine. Like, doesn't get burned, doesn't feel the cold. This is still, 1 to 2 years old. It's not denatured very much. And so kids are born like perfect in that sense. Their bodies are literally come out the womb, bang. You can be under the sun, you can be in the cold. You're built for the adaptation for survival. And then we just lose that massively as we obviously stay indoors and eat shitty food and dead chi kind of environments. So I think, yeah, for me, it's really amazing how much babies still born to maybe parents who aren't super healthy or whatever, they come out and their physiology is amazing. Like, they're super flexible. They're like the ultimate yogis. Like, literally just learn a lot from just looking at a baby and like, how do we come that far from how babies are born really, flexible, really resilient and really intelligent and really connected to source. And then, it's like, damn, what happened? But yeah, that's kind of my miracle, is like watching kids and babies and then seeing how much, strength and resilience is built into the human body. And if you just cultivate it from that point instead of losing it, like, these abilities, who knows how far and strong they go, right? If like I was doing this shit from day one, instead of starting at 20 or 25, yeah, like, it would be obviously a much easier journey. So yeah, it's interesting that we're all coming from our own perspectives, but very few of us are raised like from day one in the perfect sort of chi environment, or to super enlightened parents or whatever. So we've all been on this journey from different starting points. But babies haven't figured out from day one, man. So they've got an unfair advantage.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, we can we'll hit the stop button now if you want to chat a bit off camera. Unless anyone that's got anything else to add. Cool. All right, I'm going to end it here then. Chats, stay on the line and give me a second.